I am the last author here, Lena Pettersson, and we have 5 authors and 4 of those are here. Before I start talking, I would like to emphasize that the 3 first authors are study counselors, the 2 last authors are academics, faculty. So actually the first 3 authors have done most of the job, but we have wrote the paper together. So actually we have a very long title, but it actually poses our question here. The problem is that maybe we don't have a very good answer yet, but we'll see. So I'm not going to read it, but our idea is personal development will help motivation and also some other good things in our students' body. So we believe that the answer is yes, and we will try to give some evidence that it is true, but maybe we don't have the whole evidence yet. We have created a model for how this personal development could be introduced. We first have 2 guiding principles, and then we try to turn that into 4 themes, plus application of self-knowledge to reflection. But this has been a theme to the whole conference, so it's not new. The interesting thing maybe here is that we started from a behavioral science starting point because our study counselors have that background, and they don't have pedagogic as their background. So it's an interesting, it's a roundabout way maybe to arrive at the same result, but that could be interesting. It has been partly implemented and tested the last academic year, but we're only part way, so we're also interested in, and especially we're interested in feedback on our difficulties of assessing this, whether it helps or not. So this is the outline. I'm going to say something about why this project came about. I'm going to say something about personal development and motivation theory, but very little, because that's an enormous field and we can't go through that. Explain what our model is, say something about how we implemented it so far, put it in some context, say something about what our implementation details were and what the outcomes were, and have we any evidence of success. They might be very small. Well, so we started out because we have a problem with recruitment, retention, and academic performance. I don't think it's so rare, even though we haven't heard so much here, at least I haven't. This was in 3 different programs, and the programs are named ED and IT in Swedish. That's why it's called the EDIT model. This is electrical engineering, computer engineering, and software engineering. And actually electrical engineering, which is my background, has the worst problem. But they all have problems. So for that reason, there was a big curriculum reform project started, which we reported a little on last year. But for various reasons, the fantastic CDIO of a new program did not only get to D, and then for various reasons we didn't get further on this sort of total new design. So instead we got some interesting bits of information that we were going to use. And I want to point out that these programs are not CDIO programs yet. So we don't come from that starting point yet. But we are very heavily influenced by this because, well, partly because we have the mechanical engineering program next door at Chalmers. So we had this idea that we should have the students' development to an engineering focus, which we have heard a lot, and the personal and professional development should be the core of the program, and then we should add the disciplines sort of at the leaves of the trunk. And we also realized that all our resources in our university has to be used well to achieve these goals. That means that we should include the other staff too. It's not only the faculty that needs to participate. We have common goals and we should use all these resources. In this curriculum reform project, there was also an idea that students should be able to have a common entrance and choose what they want to do. And they have to be pretty competent early to figure out what they want. That means that they should start early to think about what their goals are. So that was also one of the reasons. Then we also have the new Swedish Qualifications Ordinance that Johan mentioned, and also the new outcomes-based evaluation system, which also partly influenced this, and also some input from industrial stakeholders. But it was mainly this design project, reform project, that made us think that this is what we need to do. And then we also thought this, we have our kids, and we have to have programs for them that they can go to, and they are not like us. So we have to do something about how our programs are run. So we said, who can do this for us? we don't have faculty that can think about personal development and motivation very much. So why don't we use our student counselors? So they actually went out and figured out a lot of things both about personal development, which they had already done because we have used coaching a lot. So coaching and personal development is very related. And there are some fundamental principles, like every person has an inherent desire to grow, but you have to maybe help. And we said that unlocking the potential, as we heard before. And that reflection is extremely essential in this, that you reflect on. But that's true for all other learning too. This is just more on a personal level. Then there are theories about motivation. There are many theories about motivation, and here are some of the more well-known. The self-determination theory also says that you have an innate driving force, especially for self-governance and for feeling belonging to others. And this book that some of you might have read, it's Drive, which is a more popular book, also states that from scientific evidence that motivation is created through self-control, mastery, and purpose. So these are things that we should strive for in our students. And of course we have this thing about having internal or external motivation factors, and we know that we do work a lot with external motivation factors, like, oh, we're going to have this kind of homework or this kind of assessment, but it's more external anyway, and if we can have more internal motivation factors in our students, we think that would be good. So after we've settled eventually on two guiding principles that come from also other research, that self-knowledge, which is an inner dimension, leads to a social ability, which is an outer dimension, and both are important. And the other is that feeling belonging, feeling liked, having self-perception and self-respect are essential for personal professional efficiency. That's true when you're working, but that's also true when you're a student. So from these, doesn't say what you should do. So now we had a big problem. And I think that most of the time was spent on this. Starting from these general principles, what should we do, or what themes should we address? So now we arrive at something that looks very similar to things you've seen before. Okay, so these are things that we now decided on to include. And there are lots of things we did not include. I think most of the work was on deciding what not to include in this, because there are so many things you could do. But we ended up with these 4 themes, and as the overall principle on how we should do this was to promote self-knowledge through reflection in all these 4 themes. And I'm not going to go through details when we decide how we decided that, that's very complicated, I think. We don't know exactly. We think also, I'm not just showing 3 years here, because we have a bachelor program 3 years, and then we have 2-year master's program. So in this work we've used with the 3 years. That these should be placed maybe differently. This is just, we don't know the details exact, but for our suggestion at the moment is to include them in different parts of the education, and that's not very dissimilar from what we've seen in other CDIO programs. I think the thing we are a bit dissimilar is that we think a lot about how to make motivated to learn when in the university, not only at the outcome at the end of the education. That's also good, but we have to think about timely delivery, to deliver, or should we say delivery, but I mean having the different aspects worked on at the right point for the students, depending on where they are. And that's why it's so important that it was the student counselors that did this work, because they know that. They talk to the students all the time. So at the end, they should be ready to engineer or prepare for further student. But while they're there, they should be motivated to learn. So in more detail, and this is not finalized yet, this is the suggestion. Here are some ideas about topics you could bring up. And these things will be incorporated in some courses, but not all, because that's not possible. We have tried to think about we could have these things in every course, as somebody mentioned on CDI 202, that I tried to do it in every course, and we don't think that that will work. So our suggestion at the moment is to integrate this in some courses. And of course there are program level outcomes, because those are included in our Qualifications Ordinance, but we also need them on course level. So And what we need to do is we should form teams, and not only of teachers, but we should have staff too, because I think we need to work together on these things. So in context also, I wanted to mention here that all these things are not separate from other things that people want in various contexts. That, for example, the Swedish Qualifications Ordinance have goals that are similar to these. And we have a vision that supports this. And we also have constructive alignment, as Johan mentioned, which is instituted, or we're working on having it all over Chalmers for all courses. So these are connected. So some examples of what we've done, I'm going to go through. We worked on so far, because this is only in the start. Study skills, which we already had, but we added more reflection workshops for the students because they heard all good things, but they never did anything. So we really have to make them work on this. Group dynamics we also had before, but we added more reflection workshops to that, so that they actually reflect on what they do themselves. A career course, which we have had for a while, but also added some mentoring at the end for career. And we also added learning outcomes in courses where there already were stuff included, but it wasn't clear that it was being assessed. So. And the outcomes then. Well, generally the students appreciate this, but they all usually say they want, tools so they know what to do, but we want them to reflect on themselves. So it's a bit different, especially for that goes for the group dynamics. And what happened, of course, that they made the students started thinking about while they were there. So the student counselor got more work rather than less from this. But that's actually good, because we want them to think early about whether this is what they want to do or not drag along. Yeah. There were several good things, especially in the group dynamics work. The teachers actually appreciated that the student counselors also came in as teachers in the courses. And the teachers were positive because they had less conflicts in some team projects than they used to have. And of course the external stakeholders that were interviewed want the usual stuff that everybody has said here. They want engineers with self-awareness who are ready to engineer. Yeah, well, that's not new. So our problem is how should we assess this? Is this successful? Well, it hasn't gone on so long, so we can't say yet, but you can measure academic success in various ways, but it's very hard to say whether changes in this has anything to do with that, And we also have the effect of just being interested in what the students think about that might change their perception. So it's very hard. And it's hard to compare cohorts and programs between programs because they are different. So we can have some qualitative approaches, some interviews, structured interviews, reflective discussions, also exit talks is something that we're thinking about, both for those who graduate, but also for those who don't graduate, who leave the program. So this is not really clear yet how we're going to do this, but we're thinking more about this. So if you have any suggestions, that's good. So what are we doing now? Well, we're going to implement this further when we have 3 programs, and the 3 programs are pretty different in how much they have of this. So they have different, but we think that the principles and the themes can be the same, whereas the actual implementation might be a little different between the different programs. We need better assessment methods, and I think the main problem is to make this sustainable in the long run. This should not fade away, go away. We need to make it have an acceptance both among the faculty and the staff, and the students, of course, but I think actually the students was the least problem here. So in conclusion, we had this model, and self-reflection, as in all learning, is key. And meta-reflection, it facilitates meta-reflection and about when you learn and what it means to learn and so on. And there has been acceptance of our student counselors as teachers, generally, I think, if those teachers have been involved, but that is actually, interestingly, I think, a change in the internal culture. So that might be the most interesting result of this, actually, to make it a common problem. Is it a success? Well, how do we know? We still believe that the answer is yes, but I think it takes more work on getting evidence whether it is or not. So I was contemplating this morning whether the biggest impact of this paper was really not its contents, but that we wrote it together. Because it's on a meta level that we actually did the work together. So, thank you. Any questions or comments? I don't know what the time is.
I think you were extremely close to 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Exemplary.
Oh, thank you.